Now it's a great pleasure to have with us Mrs. Katherine Watson, the Director of the European Cultural Foundation, an expert to speak to us about what opportunities arts and culture really present, especially during these challenging times.
Thank you, Lena, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak. And thank you to all of you for your stamina. I think the last 2 days have neither been climbing Everest or playing a chess game underwater, but nevertheless, it's been 2 rather intense days full of inspiration and wonderful ideas. Thank you to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for placing art and culture so firmly within the conference agenda. I think the soon-to-be-opened Stavros Niarchos Cultural Center is certainly a testament to the Foundation's conviction that cultural spaces are indeed an invaluable element in the ecology of our cities, and that these spaces of public encounter and participation are key to engaged citizenship and the sustainability of robust, future-fit communities. When I was watching the opening performance on Wednesday night, I couldn't not be struck by the fact that we were surrounded by apartment buildings, and all of them, I think, had the best view onto the performance that evening. And hearing from people in the last couple of days talking about the role of the library in the community, the role of the library in the complex, the role of the public park, I believe the biggest green space in the city, that this is definitely looking at the community ownership of that space. So in my reflection today, through the lens, I must say, of the European Cultural Foundation, I'd like to look at a few examples, a very few of so many examples of cultural projects that are crossing sectoral boundaries, and to, in that, consider the role of foundations in supporting them, in fact, catalyzing and fueling independent cultural work and connecting it to a wider community. So I don't believe it's about using art and culture as a tool. It's about culture as an equal, visible, and valued contributor to the sustainable development of our communities and to Europe. And I do hope you'll recognize in some of the examples, not only the faces, but the ideas and the inspiration from young people that addresses some of the alternatives that have been raised yesterday, the alternatives to the very difficult situation of youth unemployment. The European Cultural Foundation, ECF, was created in 1954 in Geneva by leading European thinkers with a vision for Europe. And their vision was much more than an economic association, much more than coal and steel. It was one that said Europe needed culture. In 2014, now that we celebrate 60 years, ECF still aspires to the European project, but as we all know, the context is much different now than it was then. Than it was when Robert Schuman boldly stated, Europe needs a soul. And I think we are still looking for that soul. In 1960, the ECF moved from Geneva to Amsterdam on the invitation of Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, the foundation's first president. ECF is an independent foundation built on 2 pillars, that of Europe and that of culture. Culture in its widest and most inclusive sense, and Europe in the broadest sense possible, spanning the continent and reaching out to the neighbors to the east and across the Mediterranean. ECF doesn't simply support culture because it happens in Europe, but for its contribution to Europe. And in this, we look at ways to being as impactful as possible and to scale our work by developing partnerships, working with other foundations, and hoping to go beyond being only a funder by combining grant-making with programming and advocacy. From 2013 to 2016, our strategic plan is driven by the theme, connecting culture, communities, and democracy. Sorry. This one. For 60 years, ECF's vision has been of an open, democratic, and inclusive Europe in which culture is a valued and key contributor. In recent years, however, we've witnessed a growing gap between people, democratic processes, and structures. People feel estranged from democratic institutions. At the same time, we have seen hundreds of organizations that demonstrate how culture can be invaluable in terms of engaging people in the future of their communities and indeed of the world. In essence, we are trying to connect or to reconnect the demos and the kratos and find the spaces, the agora, within which to achieve this. I believe that innovation springs from the spaces of interaction and intersection. And today I would like to consider art and culture in 5 such intersecting spaces. And these are intersections that I think we should be compelled not only to explore, but to nurture. They are those of the interlocal, intercultural, intersectoral, intergenerational, and interexperiential. In all of these intersections, we need to step out of our comfort zones and engage in some very active silo busting, and then consider these intersections when we develop our education systems, our communities, our places of cultural creation and exchange. So the first, interlocal. I used to talk about this as international, but the born-again nation-state is perhaps one of the grave problems of our time. Extreme nationalism and populist parties are hacking away at the very roots of our democracies, our diversity, our tolerance. So rather than thinking of Europe as a federation of nations, or even perhaps as a supernation, Europe really is a complex and rich web of intersections between neighborhoods, cities, and regions. We've seen that positive change through culture first becomes apparent in local communities. ECF aims to reinforce our connection with citizens who are raising awareness of their creative potential to generate new social, environmental, economic, and democratic models through their cultural practices. We've been trying to work in a very connected way with cultural organizations and the individuals we fund. One example is our Tandem cultural exchange program, which we do in partnership with several other foundations. The Tandem Cultural Managers Exchange is a process more so than a collection of collaborative co-productions. And this map shows some over the past 3 years in various targeted geographic regions. In the spring of 2014, the second round of Tandem Shamel, which connects organizations, individuals from Europe to the Arab Mediterranean region, was launched. And in this, I would also like to refer to a recent publication by ASEF, the European Asian Foundation, and it's a publication in advance of the ministers' meeting between Asia and Europe. It's called Enabling Crossovers, Good Practice in Creative Industries. Tandem is only one of many, many examples in that, but I will speak just briefly about Tandem. So after the Partnership Forum in Tunis in March, 8 tandems found each other, and one of them brings together Abdullah Sharkis from the Yankeles for Visual Arts in Alexandria and Martha Buziuro from Plays to Place in Athens. Tracing Dinocrates discovers the Greek contribution to the city of Alexandria in relation to its cosmopolitan past. Within that, the project investigates and showcases the traces of the Greek presence in the city. It is reflected in the urban surfaces as well as on the lives and everyday practices of the inhabitants. Another example of connecting local actions is the Doc Next network that brings together media organizations in 4 cities, Istanbul, London, Warsaw, and Sevilla, all focused on youth and expanded media education. And this year, with partners, we launched something called a network program, which is set out to connect, nourish, and illuminate a network of local cultural changemakers, enabling a European-wide community of practice to emerge that evolves naturally based on common interest and enables members to learn from each other and collectively develop their ideas, skills, and expertise. The connected or networked local community building organizations present a very different picture of Europe, one growing from the bottom up through cultural actions. Our support of these organizations is not specifically project-based, rather recognizes not only their local relevance, but their wider resonance. The second intersection I'd like to talk about is intercultural. The increased movement of people over the past decades, and certainly the freedom of movement that many of us enjoy in Europe, offers us an incredible richness of connections and knowledge exchange. But are we using this diversity to our best advantage? I fear that we are not. I think simply of how I might recruit for a position. Do I keep a fixed agenda of requirements and experience, advertising and reaching out to the same places and platforms? If so, then I shouldn't be the least surprised to receive cookie-cutter CVs, people all trained in the same systems, having the very same perspective. Do we provide platforms for the stories, the visions, the narratives of all Europeans? Do we challenge the prevailing imageries and perspectives of mainstream media? For a number of years, ECF has supported individual artists, researchers, and cultural workers to travel to and from the EU through Step Beyond travel grants, small, responsive grants with a huge potential, I think, to kickstart careers and, more importantly, to foster and nurture new intercultural connections. Application is online through what's called the Step Beyond Lab, which is also the place where stories are shared and long-term connections are nurtured. The DocNext network that I mentioned earlier has been responsible for a collective project called Remapping Europe. With this multi-year initiative, the community-based media centers that form the network have worked with migrant and refugee youth organizations in their communities to empower these young, unheard voices to tell their stories through media and counteract the prevailing negative imagery of the deluge of migrants that mainstream media feeds us. The videos have been collected in a media collection with hundreds of videos online. This work has also resulted in a publication called Remixing Europe that uses as its starting point 4 local media incidents in the UK, Spain, Turkey, and Poland, and fueled a wider debate about the representation of migrants in the media. I've left some flyers describing the publication, and you can certainly receive it through our website. The third intersection that I would like to talk about is intersectoral, which I think is at the core of your conference, how culture works across sectors, how in fact we don't look at sectors anymore, how we look at things much more holistically. Now, from the perspective of a foundation that in our very name supports culture, I know we need to break out of a very comfortable box, or that box will become a coffin, and look at ensuring that culture is an equal voice around what I see as a metaphoric planning and development table that is not culture in service of itself or of the economy, but of culture as an invaluable fourth pillar in our sustainable development, alongside economy, the environment, and society. I'm mindful of language and the fact that our lexicon is not always a shared one. Recently in Zagreb, we were talking about these intersectoral connections, and it was clear that the concept also extends and should extend to the crossover between civil society and the public and private sectors. So this too should figure into our intersectoral engagement. Civil society has been feeling powerless and voiceless, but change does not come only from the vocal reaction to an issue or action, but by using these issues and actions as a starting point for a longer-term process of changing the frame or context and becoming an active and valued contributor. In 2013, through one of our regular grant calls, we put a special spin on it and asked for collaboration projects that were cross-sectoral by nature. Cross-sectoral, so culture working with finance ideas, culture working with social ideas, culture working with environmental organizations. And we've been inspired by the range of applications and ideas that have followed the grants with much interest. Within this call, there were several organizations from Greece. Artivists for Change is an initiative of the Dynamo Project Space in Thessaloniki in partnership with Jordan Open Source Association and Spring Lessons in Aufbauhaus in Germany. The project was developed with the contemporary context of the multidimensional social, environmental, and political challenges faced by communities in European and MENA region countries. It is concerned with ensuring that public expression of opinion, or activism, is more creative, less violent, more effective, and more fit into long-term change. Concrete outcomes include an online database of creative public space interventions, facilitating the exchange of knowledge and ideas between artists and activists, and the implementation of a training course on activism through design and social innovation in Thessaloniki. The main target group of Artivists for Change are young people, with a special focus on young artists and creators, as well as activists in different fields: social, political, environmental. And within this project, Moritz Bangkok's installation, Wave, is an interactive performance asking the public, passers-by, friends, refugees, to wave towards the sea. Before the action took place, the participants in Thessaloniki were invited to join a picnic inspired by the Balkan tradition to share a meal together by the graves of relatives. The performative intervention is both simple, clear, and at the same time ambiguous in its meaning. It greets the people who do and don't reach the European shores. At the same time, it is linked to the protest of Gezi Park, where the dancer and choreographer Erdem Gündüz, as standing man, became an icon for the protests in Turkey. Wave is an artistic reaction to the continuing loss of life in attempted passage across the Mediterranean. Moritz explains, while Europe is facing a great interior crisis in economy, we are seeing the possibility of losing credibility of our democratic system if we cannot find a constructive solution for the incidents on the Mediterranean. His is an attempt to overcome apathy. The performance was repeated in Alexandria, Beirut, and Barcelona. Cultural activism and beyond activism was also acknowledged this year in the awarding of the ECF Princess Marguerite Award to Theodor Chelakowski, longtime leader in the Right to the City movement in Zagreb, and Teatro Valle Occupato, a growing group of theater makers who squatted Teatro Valle, Rome's oldest public theater, to save it from privatization. And I echo their message: culture, like water and air, is a common good. However, the work goes much beyond activism and much beyond the individual act. Theodor, for instance, and the cultural organizations he has spearheaded are now key players in the development processes of their community. They're actively engaged in their community and across Croatia. A major objective of the prize, which is awarded annually in Brussels, is to raise awareness on a European level of the change-making potential of culture. Change-making, which is so often acted out on a very local stage. Another example of this cross-sectoral work is Urban Lightscapes, which may be familiar to some of you. The organization Before Light, who work across Greece, has partnered with the Institut d'Arquitectura Avançada in Catalonia in Spain, and SOAP, the social and artistic platform in the Netherlands. They're investigating and experimenting with the relationship between urban lighting and society by encouraging dialogue, active participation, and creativity. By bringing together local communities, academics, and professional contributors with light artists, the project partners will create participatory light installations in underprivileged neighborhoods of Maastricht. Issues of innovation, creativity, safety, and community cohesion run through this initiative. In 2014, having learned from the collaboration grant scheme of 2013, and in partnership with the community hubs in our network program, ECF has launched a first call for ideas, innovative cross-sectoral collaboration that engages Europeans in redefining and shaping public space. From the applications we receive, we hope to identify 50 innovative and hopefully viable ideas. These will be invited to a first, what we're calling Idea Camp, co-hosted by Les Têtes de l'Art in Marseille in October of this year. The Idea Camp will provide a safe and inspirational place for cross-pollination of ideas, allowing partnerships to emerge and ideas to flourish. The camp will be both a meeting place and a working place, including workshops around topics and methodologies that will help the selected participants to investigate and develop their ideas, exchange knowledge, find new collaborations, inspire and connect with practitioners from different sectors, and to explore and challenge new democratic alternatives. The application deadline is a few weeks away on the 15th of July. After the Idea Camp, The participants will be invited to submit their reworked and energized ideas for consideration for a research and development grant, of which we'll award 25 in the amount of €10,000. This, in fact, is new territory for ECF, moving far away from project support and looking to kickstart an idea long before it has a tangible outcome, bridging, we hope, the gap between the idea and possible project funding, fueling innovation. The fourth intersection is intergenerational. We are on the brink of the greatest generational imbalance that we in the Western world have ever experienced. Baby boomers are aging. I stand before you as a case in point. The generations that follow are not nearly so numerous. Baby boomers are holding on to jobs until they retire. Retirement ages are increasing in an attempt to mitigate the increasing social costs of aging. But at what other cost? The average unemployment rate across Europe, as we heard yesterday, for young people is 25%. But to arrive at that, some countries come in at much greater than 50%. We know that Greece approached 60% last year. Most of an entire generation is underemployed or out of work or overschooled and responsible to pick up the pieces that their parents and grandparents have scattered. Yet we look discreetly at aging and at youth issues. We often look discreetly at aging and youth issues. In this cataclysmic moment, would it not be better to find intergenerational solutions and actively foster intergenerational knowledge exchange? Memory Box is an initiative that has come out of another of the Tandem cultural managers' exchange streams, the one focused on community and participation. Memory Box aims to strengthen community cohesion by collecting and sharing people's personal memories from the city or the neighborhood they live in. Digital stories have been gathered through local storytelling workshops with older, often socially isolated participants living in Newcastle, young migrants in Magdeburg, and individuals living with a very new suburb in Arnhem. The Memory Box stories are available through an online app and in beautiful wooden boxes that are shared, at local community centers. And this example leads me to my last and fifth intersection, that of inter-experiential, a little bit harder to put in one word. And this project leads into it quite nicely because it uses new digital tools to bring together different sources of knowledge and generational experiences. Younger generations are often defined by being on one side of a very wide digital gap. Socioeconomic conditions make this gap more acute in both our urban and rural communities. However, the very technology that divides has the power to connect, as we heard both from the City of Manchester this morning and Nate Hill from the Chattanooga Public Library. So much in all, as there has been quite a significant, if I could call it, amateur bashing, the connection between the experienced and the expert that the internet affords is undeniable. In order to begin to address the global challenges we're facing, our sources of knowledge must be many and diverse, converging in the electrifying spaces, these intersections in between. Can we not place the nuclear physicist alongside a traditional Aboriginal thinker and healer, the physician beside the care worker and the patient who have suffered through all of the stages that the physician might study? It has been widely said that healthcare is too important to leave to the doctors, and I would add very loudly that culture has a role to play in this very important sector, now under siege due to economic pressures and, in fact, to the aging population. Connecting sources of knowledge for the future, or perhaps better described as encouraging a confluence of the flows of knowledge, is one of ECF's goals and against which we measure our impact. For a number of years, ECF has been host to the international online project Lab for Culture, and in the past year, we have taken a new look at online platforms and have developed ECF Labs, an open, user-driven space that encourages people to gather around themes, ideas, concepts. And we look at this to being a major source of knowledge for us and connection to the field, linking this knowledge to other sources, be they academic or practice-based. In closing, are we ready for these intersections? Can we rethink our systems to be more responsive, more dynamic, less stuck, less static? Can we foster a world of active citizenship? Recalling Peter Vermeersch's quote at the opening of my speech, democracy needs imagination. It's not simply about voting, it is about engagement, participating, voicing, making, and doing. Arts and culture is a powerful key. And I would like to end with a final, very short video about the Idea Camp and its theme of public space, encouraging you all to pass the message and the invitation to join, to passing it on to both cultural organizations and non-cultural organizations alike. And I think they're going to help me in the back. Thank you very much.